All right, welcome back, commissioners and members of the public watching remotely. I'm Manuel Rustin, the chair of the Instructional Quality Commission, and I hereby call this meeting to order. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we are continuing to hold these important meetings virtually. The IQC meeting logistics will follow Governor Gavin Newsom's March 17, 2020 Executive Order N-2920, which allows state bodies that fall under the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act to hold public meetings that are covered by Bagley-Keene with web conferencing and audio conferencing. In compliance with California's statewide stay-at-home order, today's IQC meeting is a video conference meeting with a live webcast. Public comment will be open before each agenda item and close at the end of that agenda item. Please do not call in before the agenda item that you wish to make a comment on begins. Public comment on items on today's meeting agenda may be provided during the meeting by dialing 712-770-4993 and then following a prompt to provide a participant access code. Callers will then be added to a queue. The operator will notify callers when it is their turn to provide public comment. Public comment will be limited to 1 minute. If possible, we recommend members of the public dialing in for public comment continue to view the live stream of the meeting for a better understanding of the meeting's status. When it is your turn, please mute the live cast audio. When giving public comment, please state the following. First, your first and last name. Second, your organization affiliation, if any. And third, your public comment. Again, the phone number is 712-770-4993. The access code is 590-6620. The phone number and address code will be announced at the start of public comment for each item. This is also outlined in the May 19 and May 20th IQC agenda posted on the IQC webpage. I'd like to introduce, well, actually, we introduced him yesterday. I think now it's time for the roll call. All right, Denise, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Chair Rustin.
Present.
Commissioner Christina Andre.
Present.
Commissioner Estorgal Manza. Commissioner Chapman.
Present.
Commissioner Costa Hernandez.
Present.
Commissioner Fairchild.
Present.
Commissioner Friedman.
Present.
Commissioner Gotanda. Commissioner Jarvis.
Present.
Commissioner Pantai.
Present.
Commissioner Popovich.
Present.
Commissioner Munoz.
Present.
Commissioner Renteria.
Present.
Commissioner Williamson.
Here.
Commissioner Young.
Present.
Commissioner Howard.
Present.
Assembly Member Ramos. Senator Allen. That's it.
Thank you. Executive Director Coates, can you please lead us in the salute to the flag?
Yes. And if you're able, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Thank you. And all right, so today we are continuing with item 4 from the agenda, and we are continuing to item 4, particularly item 4C. Give me 1 second to scroll to those talking points. All right, here we go. So the next item on the agenda is a presentation of the Arts Education Adoption Criteria, Arts Education Framework, Chapter 10, to prepare us for the upcoming arts education adoption. The public comment line for this agenda item is now open. Please follow the instructions on the screen if you would like to make public comment following the presentation. I will now turn it over to Executive Director Coates.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to, there we go. So I'd like to start off by introducing our new administrator. So as you know, Cliff Rudnick, longtime administrator of the Instructional Resources Unit, retired earlier this year. Cliff dedicated a large part of his life to CDE and to our division and put in place a number of valuable systems, leaving a wonderful legacy. And so after a long search, I am just pleased to announce Dr. Mike Torres as the new administrator of the Instructional Resources Unit. Mike holds a doctorate in educational leadership with a specialization in educational technology. He has been a math and science classroom teacher, and he has had various roles within the California Department of Education, including in the Special Education Division and also the Assessment Division. So we are thrilled that he is now part of the Seaford family. And then finally, I just want to make this note before I hand it over to Dr. Torres, that I know that often when people think of a new person coming into a role, the first thing that is said is regarding the shoes that they have to fill. But I would just like to take the time to ask that we only ask Mike to walk in and fill his own shoes and to create his own legacy. He is inheriting an awesome team, and I'm excited for his lead in the upcoming adoptions. I'll turn it over to you.
And thank you for the introduction, Executive Director Coates. I really appreciate that. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm honored to meet you all and look forward to many years of supporting this advisory body with respect to the State Board of Education adoption of instructional materials for the provision of high quality learning for the students of California. I know that I have some big shoes to fill and as the administrator of the Instructional Resources Unit, but know that we have a solid, dedicated team of seasoned veterans that have helped to make the transition much smoother. Last month, we held the first virtual instructional materials adoption trainings, and I'm proud of the work that our team has done to make both the arts and world languages trainings a success. And speaking of team, I do have Kyle Petty here today to help me co-present on the arts evaluation criteria. Now, we asked for some of your time today to discuss in some detail the evaluation criteria that was used by publishers to develop and is being used by reviewers to evaluate the arts instructional materials submitted for adoption by the SBE this year. As I said earlier, I'm joined by Kyle Petty. He is the lead consultant on the arts adoption training, arts adoption, to provide an update on the arts adoption reviewer training, which took place April 12th through 16th of last month, and outline the role the commission will play once reviewers complete their independent review, engage in panel deliberations, and submit recommendations to report their findings. We will explain the 5 criteria categories for evaluation, focusing on specific criterion in an activity that replicates one aspect of reviewer training and also provides commissioners with an opportunity to review specific criteria and discuss ways the criteria language will guide the review of materials. This flowchart shows the sequence of major components of California's instructional materials adoption process. The flowchart begins with an invitation for publishers to submit meeting, appointment of instructional materials reviewers and content review experts by the SBE, to the availability of local educational agencies to go ahead and begin ordering programs. We are currently at the stage where instructional materials have been delivered to the instructional material reviewers and content review experts for their independent review. From the time samples of programs are submitted by publishers for evaluation, approximately 6 months elapse before final adoption action is taken by the SBE. It's important to note that the result of deliberations will be a report of findings that the IQC will receive, discuss, and subsequently make recommendations to the SBE. To effectively train reviewers, our approach was to outline a reviewer work plan based on 4 steps of the process. This slide contains an example of the work plan that we provided reviewers with. This work plan was created to answer the question, what are the steps to conducting the review of materials? The training focused on the Step 1 tasks in the left-hand column of the plan. Each task during this first step is training, and the content of the training is identified as it relates to the review or deliberations process. For example, the first bullet of Task 1 notes 3A standards. This corresponded with a session on day 1 of reviewer training that included an activity that fortified their knowledge of the standards. That aspect of the training was designed to support the completion of Task 3A in the third step of the work plan. The evaluation criteria will be the instrument by which submitted programs for the 2021 arts adoption are evaluated. Alignment to the criteria will determine whether the programs are adopted or not adopted by the SBE. Now, many of you were here for the development of the arts framework, which includes the evaluation criteria. However, some of you were not here and may not be as familiar with the criteria. Also, some of you, and we're very thankful for you, served as facilitators for the reviewer training last month and will do so again for the deliberations in July. Thank you for your hard work on this. You will all, however, discuss the panel reports of findings and recommendations at your meeting in September, and make your recommendations to the SBE for action in November. So it is critical that you all have a deep understanding of the criteria used by the panels. Now let's talk about the report of findings and what these reports mean for the IQC. Part of the review process includes verifying the sources publishers provide, and in some cases, adding their own. During the deliberations process, the added citations will be verified by 2 of the panel members before they are included in the report. The report of findings will include program information, a summary of materials for the program, recommendation of the review panel, and citations for the criteria for each evaluation criteria. The IQC will need to discuss and determine if the advisory body agrees with the recommendations made by the review panels. Since these recommendations are made based on the evaluation criteria instrument, it is then important for commissioners to have a good understanding of the evaluation criteria and the adoption process. In this presentation, we'll be focusing on the process by which we facilitate a state-level adoption of instructional resources for arts educators. We'll discuss aspects of the California Arts Standards and the Arts Education Framework and how each influenced the work of the reviewers and the adoption process. The flowchart that you see on this slide is a reminder on the evolution from standards to frameworks and finally to instructional materials. Part of our context is a review of the adoption process and where this work is situated in the larger trajectory of standards, frameworks, and instructional materials from the previous slide. This flowchart provides a timeline of the process, including adoption of the standards, the framework, and the instructional materials. The following activities have already taken place: the adoption of the standards and framework, reviewer appointment by the SBE to be reviewers for this adoption, and the invitation to submit meeting for publishers and the reviewer training. The end result of the review and deliberations is a report of findings that will be delivered to commissioners of the IQC, yourselves, and eventually to the SBE in November of 2021. The State Board is the final decision-making authority and the final step when it comes to the adoption process. The criteria are organized around 5 categories. The program submission are in the process of being reviewed right now by one of 3 review panels, and each must cover the requirements in these 5 categories: alignment with the California Arts Education Performance Standards, program organization, assessment, access and equity, and instructional planning and support. It's important to understand the expectation that only those programs determined by the reviewers to meet all criteria in category 1, and that includes all the content standards, and that have strengths in each of categories 2 through 5 will be recommended for adoption. You will notice as you read through the criteria chapter that was attached to our agenda that there are many criteria statements that are fairly broad in application. The question of how much is enough content comes up frequently in these reviews. As I said a moment ago, it's ultimately the SBE appointed reviewers who use their professional judgment to determine if a criterion has been fully met or if a standard has been fully covered in the materials. It is possible that public participation will affect the review, either at the panel level during the deliberations in July, or when the materials come to the IQC or the SBE. The IQC will have two opportunities to hear public comment. The first at a public comment meeting specifically scheduled for the arts adoption, and the second at your September 2021 meeting, when you will make your recommendations to the state board. It is critical that you know the criteria well, as public comment may offer different interpretations. You'll have access to the public comment submitted during the entire process. So at this point, we could just read all the criteria statements to you, but I guarantee that that would be extremely boring. So instead, we will highlight some specific criteria, then we would like to have you dive right into the criteria in an activity. And then after the activity, we'll debrief and take any final questions you may have. Now, before I relinquish the virtual podium to Kyle, who will take you through the 5 categories of criteria and highlight some that you'll likely hear about during your public comment meetings. Are there any questions so far? As a former math teacher, I'm really good on wait time. Okay. I don't see any hands, and so I am now going to relinquish control to Kyle.
Thanks so much, Dr. Torres, and thank you all. Good morning, commissioners and members of the public. I'm going to first apologize. Like most people who present on Zoom, there's landscaping that's happening in this neighborhood virtually every day. So we're being buzzed by all manner of loud equipment. So my apologies for any background noise that you get. My role here is to provide a category by category explanation of the arts criteria. Category 1 contains 9 individual statements. This category is commonly called the gatekeeper in our office because to be eligible for adoption, each program must fully meet every criteria statement in this category, including full coverage of all the content standards. This category is critical. Much of the content the panels deliberate relates to the extent to which publishers meet particular standards. On the first day of deliberations, it's not uncommon for publisher questions to focus squarely on how the publisher citations that they provided exemplify met criteria. It's also important to note that a panel may find grade level standards met for some grades and not others. This does not prevent a panel from recommending the program, but instead creates a recommendation for grade levels met and not recommended for grade levels where the materials did not cover the standards. Next, I'm going to spend a few minutes reviewing those arts standards. So as noted, criteria 1, we call the gatekeeper criteria for adoption, and criterion 1.1 stipulates that the resource and the materials are aligned with the California Arts Standards. As a reminder, the legislation in AB 2862 that initiated California's standards revision specified that the revision must be based on the National Core Arts Standards, or NCAS. The 2019 California Arts Standards are similar, and some standards are identical to the NCAS. Publishers and reviewers are aware of the differences and know that they are evaluating materials as they align with the California Arts Standards specifically. The slide you're looking at now includes a definition of artistic literacy from the arts framework, and it further refines the definition provided on page 6 of the arts standards. You'll note the components of artistic literacy include not only understanding, but creating, performing, presenting, producing, responding, and connecting through the arts. A program meeting all requirements in Category 1, particularly Criterion 1, ensures that materials are consistent with the philosophical foundations that underpin the standards. They're derived from the NCAS, but California's Standards Advisory Committee added the arts as profession in recognition of the role that the arts play in California's economy. Now, I'm going to highlight a few of the specific criterion within Category 1, again, beginning with 1.1. The publishers themselves declare where and how they believe their programs demonstrate each criterion. Reviewers have been trained to validate this alignment to the arts standards. As experts, reviewers know that some elements in the 2019 standards are shared and some are discipline specific. While the shared elements may be useful when collaborating with colleagues or making connections across disciplines and subject areas, teachers use the discipline-specific elements to plan sequential, standards-based instruction. Publishers complete and send with the program materials tools called standards maps to show alignment to the arts standards. Similar to how the evaluation criteria maps show alignment to the criterion statements of each category, the standards map shows alignment to the art standards for each grade level of the program. Publishers provide citations to show their programs are responsive to each standard, and the reviewers are tasked with checking those citations to confirm alignment. Reviewers will confirm standards maps for every grade level for which the program is intended. Reviewers may find that citations are not linked to correct exemplars, or may feel that additional citations that they've found in their independent review better support that criteria. In these cases, reviewers track their own citations on the standards maps, and they bring those for the discussion and deliberations. Beyond the standards in Criterion 1.1, we want to look a bit closer at some of the other elements of this gatekeeper category. That said, please take a moment to read Category 1, Criterion 1.3 on the slide. I just want to highlight the discipline-specific learning that must be evident in all 4 artistic processes. Again, we rely on the expertise of the arts educators to evaluate the materials with a fundamental understanding of these artistic processes. The next slide just is a reminder of those 4 artistic processes, so you can see the graphic that we use in the framework on the slide. These processes are another organizing feature of the standards and include creating, responding, connecting, and performing for dance, theater, and music, producing, which is the media arts version of performing, and presenting, which is the visual arts version of performing. The 4 processes are not in any order, and all are not necessarily addressed in a single lesson. Another example to share is from Category 1 and its Criterion 1.6. You'll note that the requirement to include, quote, culturally and linguistically responsive activities to engage students, and the broad requirement to incorporate, quote, historical, contemporary, and multicultural artistic concepts. The review process will rely on the publisher's ability to create these opportunities in their materials and the reviewer's ability to recognize and understand their design. Our last example for Category 1 is Criterion 1.7. Note the cross-disciplinary statements indicating how the student will study connections among the arts disciplines. So we'll shift to Category 2 now. Remember that all programs must meet Category 1 and show strengths in categories 2 through 5 to be recommended for adoption. I won't go over all the statements within these categories now, but I can't underscore how important they are for your preparations as the September meeting approaches. The conversations that are had in deliberations and at this September meeting may hinge on this discussion. Category 2 calls for materials that are clearly organized and include a coherent instructional design that provides structure for what students should learn each year and allows teachers to teach the content efficiently and effectively. This category includes 9 individual criterion statements. Note that while there's no specific time requirement, programs should provide sufficient instructional content for 180 days of instruction. I'm not going to go into these statements in detail because the focus of our breakout after this presentation is on category 2. So at that time, you'll have a facilitated discussion on the 9 statements in that category. Category 3 calls for multiple models of diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment tasks for measuring what students know and are able to do, while also providing guidance for teachers on how to interpret assessment results to guide instruction. The program provides teachers with discipline-specific assessment practices at each grade level or grade span necessary to prepare all students for success in later grade level or grade span arts education. There are 7 statements in this category that reference a number of purposes and types of assessment. Category 4 is designed to ensure that the programs submitted provide universal and equitable access to high-quality curriculum and instruction for all students. The criteria highlights students with diverse needs for differentiated instruction for all students, including students who are English learners, at promise, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, advanced learners, and students with and without visible disabilities. Chapter 10 of the Arts Framework provides background and depth for Category 4 with 8 criteria statements. The overarching philosophy of Chapter 10 of the framework is that the curriculum should be accessible to all students. The emphasis of the chapter is on identifying the needs that students have and providing strategies to address those needs. It is in the instructional strategies that the materials will most clearly support the goals of access and equity. Materials should provide explicit guidance for teachers on how to differentiate instruction so that students with any special needs can have the same access to the curriculum as any other student. Finally, the 14 statements in Category 5 require instructional materials to contain a clear path for teachers to follow when planning their 180 days of instruction and require the materials to offer strong support during implementation. Some examples of instructional planning and support criterion include strengths in lesson plans and pacing guides, instructional strategies for multiple learning modalities, connections for arts education concepts across the curriculum and exemplars of interdisciplinary instruction, appropriate use of platform-neutral electronic resources, homework assignments to support learning and provide parent, guardian, and caretaker engagement. So with that, that's my overview of all 5 categories, which you have access to in the IQC agenda for today's meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions on the 5 categories so far. Otherwise, I can hand it back over to Dr. Torres. Okay, Dr. Torres, it looks like it's back to you now. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Kyle. So far, we've talked about the adoption process and the 5 categories of the instructional materials chapter of the ARTS framework. Now we're going to discuss the actual evaluation criteria tool that reviewers are using during their independent evaluations. As part of their submission for adoption, publishers complete evaluation criteria maps, which are aligned to the evaluation criteria from Chapter 10 of the ARTS curriculum framework. The evaluation criteria map is a way to document where in the program The publisher meets each criterion in the form of citations. On the slide is an example of a completed evaluation criteria map with publisher citations, indicating where in their materials each criteria has been satisfied. Note that in this example, you're seeing how citations might reference page numbers and or have embedded links to the publisher's digital program. During their evaluation, reviewers will check the citations and potentially add their own in preparation for discussion during deliberations. And that's in order to have meaningful conversations with their fellow panel members. Reviewers will mark yes or no as to whether or not they feel the publisher has fully covered the content described. Now, this slide has a closer view of the comment fields from the same form from the previous slide, so the text is just a bit more legible. Note that for the statements marked N, reviewers include a rationale for their finding or a description of the specific part of the criteria statement that was at issue. This preparation makes for a rich discussion at the deliberations in July in order to inform the report of findings and ultimately the panel's recommendation to the IQC. Now, before we get into specifics, let's take a look at the big picture of the criteria. Let's start with some guidance that you can use when interpreting the language in the criteria. When the criteria uses words like such as or e.g., the items being referenced should be considered as examples. This kind of language doesn't actually appear that often in the criteria document itself, but you will encounter it in the standards and the framework, which are both included in Category 1 criteria and a large part of the materials review. The report of findings will include these criteria statements as well. As you review the report, you will want to read the criteria statements very carefully to identify everything required by each statement. Reviewers were cautioned to be careful about reading into the criteria. So if the criteria do not say where or how something must be included, then it's up to the publisher. We gave very specific guidance to the reviewers on this issue at the training event in April. A number of the criteria statements use language such as where appropriate or age and grade level appropriate. These statements do not necessarily require the content to be included at every grade level. This is why we bring experienced teachers and content experts into our review process so they can apply their professional judgment to questions like these. All right, so that's a lot of information so far. The rest of the time for this presentation is dedicated to understanding the criteria for educational content by looking more closely at Category 2, Program Organization. You're going to be divided into groups, and each group will have a facilitator and CDE support. In the breakout session, you will be presented with a brainstorming tool on the individual criteria statements of Category 2. So there will be 3 breakout meetings at this time. This slide shows the 3 groups and their respective facilitators. CDE staff will be present as well to help support the breakout session. In order to maintain a forum for the public to attend the proceeds of this meeting, we will need to ask you to log out of this main Zoom meeting and join these respective Zoom meetings. I believe you received emails with these breakout credentials as well. We will have 20 minutes of discussion in your breakout rooms. So at 9:55, you will log out of the breakout Zoom meeting and log back into this main session to reconvene and share out. Are there any questions? Just to reiterate, the breakout rooms are broken out by last names. So Group A is last names A through F, Group B is last names G through P, and Group C is last names Q through Z. And if there aren't any questions, then we'll see you back here in the main Zoom meeting at 9:55.
So I just want to make sure that they have a chance to log back in. missing a third. There we go. They're back. Are you there, Mike?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Handing it over.
Executive Director Coates, appreciate it. All right. So at this point, thank you for breaking out and having those discussions on Category 2. Does anybody want to share anything noteworthy from your conversations, particularly any challenges that were overcome, questions that can benefit our collective understanding of Category 2, any questions that came up, any aha moments that occurred, and what questions does this raise about other categories of the evaluation criteria? So I don't see them. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute and share.
I'll just make one comment. I just thought the small group really had a productive conversation and really helped to understand. I think, Mike, we were in the same group, but really kind of helped to understand what to look for and things that have worked in the past. So I thought the structure was great to have large group and small group.
Thank you, Member Strauss. Commissioner Fairchild.
I was just going to say, I think that there was a great discussion, combining a couple of thoughts that, everybody's coming to this with some expertise and they have understanding about the curriculum and really trying to make sure that they're looking at, as Kimberly was saying, does it have it? Does it not have it? And not to what degree? And really, making sure as reviewers, that they're looking at it to try and give opportunities to many opportunities to the students in the state. So,
thank you, Commissioner Fairchild. Member Rucker.
One of the things I appreciated in the conversation for the breakout I sat in on was I appreciated before you did the breakouts, the table setting that the staff did in explaining the approach to the adoption and the use of the criteria and explaining the focus on what artists do and what students do. The other thing that I clearly heard from the educators in the room I observed, they were also talking about what teachers do as a function of being an art instructor. And so they were able to really clearly define what they believe and explain what they believe the publishers need to provide to teachers to support that instruction. So it was a very impressive conversation to listen to.
Thank you, Member Rucker. Does anybody else want to share out? You guys just want to hear me talk more? Oh.
Just jumping in really quick, I really appreciated Commissioner Fairchild and the way that she helped us distinguish how we are to approach this in the sense of not what I would want to do, but I need to take a look at, and she mentioned it a little bit earlier, but where we're just making sure we're at that initial level, and then the LEAs get to be able to go deeper to make sure that that particular curriculum will support what they want in their programs. And it really helps change the adjustment when we go to look at that. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Williamson. Commissioner Munoz?
Hi, I like to appreciate Commissioner Jarvis, the way she also presented. We looked at the organization of it, but it was also interesting to note that arts has never, of all the teaching, we have never seen a textbook for art. I think the last time I seen one was 15 years ago. So this is all new and pretty exciting to see how this academic curriculum has evolved and how we're all going to play a role in it. So it was a good eye opener that we need to also start looking at some of the other structures within art, so that we have that background, so that as we evaluate it, we have a clearer understanding of what we're looking at, particularly the professions in California. That's new. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Munoz. Yes, we are breaking new ground. This is exciting work. All right, any other final comments? Going once? Going twice. At this point, my students would yell out sold, and then that's when I get the participation. All right, with that said, we're going to go ahead and move on in our slide deck. So in addition to reviewing programs with the evaluation criteria, reviewers will also evaluate programs according to the SBE Standards for Evaluating Instructional Materials for Social Content, the 2013 edition. And this is a great point that Commissioner Rustin brought up in our group is, well, when do they do the social content? So that was actually a great segue and thought process to the review. The social content review process grew from an awareness that the things students encounter in their instructional materials can affect their perceptions of the world, including their attitudes and beliefs. The guidelines ensure representation of groups such as males and females, ethnic and cultural groups, people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, and people with disabilities. Other topics for review include categories of entrepreneur and labor, religion and the environment. Guidelines reflect outcomes of Senate Bill 48, or the Fair Education Act, which was signed into law in 2011. Notably, the FAIR Act focuses on the contributions of LGBTQ+ individuals as both an educational content issue and a social content issue. There is an established process for publishers to remedy social content issues that are found in their instructional materials. Many publishers have already participated in social content reviews, either in state adoptions or in the optional social content reviews that we conduct on an ongoing basis for supplemental materials. Now, while most social content issues can be addressed through this process, a program that has pervasive issues in the area of social content will not be recommended for adoption. Social content citations follow the program recommendation in the report of findings that you'll be receiving. Let's look again at the report of findings and make some connections between the arts adoption and the next steps. Each publisher submission, once reviewed and deliberated, will be the subject of a report of findings that recommends or does not recommend the materials for adoption. At the deliberations, Commissioners Fairchild, Costa Hernandez, and Jarvis will guide reviewers to reach consensus, then facilitate the drafting of a report of findings. And that report will include developing statements for each category of the criteria, stating whether the program meets or does not meet that category, 3 or 4 criteria statements that best exemplify the panel's overall finding of that category, verify each other's citations, develop the overall recommendation for the program, either to recommend or not recommend, and list any edits and corrections and social content citations that the panel came up with within its review. All right, so on to next steps. This slide contains the post-deliberations actions according to the SBE approved schedule of significant events. Within these milestones, IQC commissioners can expect to receive a document titled IMR CRE Report of Findings at least 10 days before the first meeting of the commission that follows the issuance of a report of findings per Title 5 of the California Code of Regulations, or CCRs, Section 9519. Title 5 CCR Section 9524 then states that commissioners must evaluate instructional materials according to the SBE adopted content standards, curriculum frameworks, evaluation criteria, and social content standards. This will occur prior to the IQC program adoption recommendations in September per CCR Section 9524, Section 4. The Commission must conduct a roll call vote with at least 9 affirmative votes required for the recommendations, or at least 10 affirmative votes required for the recommendations when all 18 commissioners vote. The September meeting will include a recommendation of the Commission Advisory Report. Those recommendations may be different than those of the review panels as contained in the IMR CRE Report of Findings. The Commission shall not recommend rewrites of instructional materials. The Commission Advisory Report shall be presented to the SBE along with the IMR CRE Report of Findings. Right. Are there any questions about the arts evaluation criteria and steps moving forward for the IQC for adoption of arts instructional materials? All right, that concludes this presentation. I believe we have public comment.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, we'll now hear public comment on the presentation. Are there any members of the public wishing to make public comment on this item?
We do not have any public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the public comment line for this agenda item is now closed. And up next is agenda item 4D, which is presentation of the 2021 California World Languages Instructional Materials Adoption Criteria, California World Languages Framework, Chapter 13. So the next item, of course, is the presentation for the World Language Adoption Criteria, and this is to prepare us for the upcoming World Languages Adoption. The public comment line for this agenda item is now open. Please follow the instructions on the screen if you would like to make public comment following the presentation. I will now turn it back over to Executive Director Coates.
Thank you. We are really hoping that the presentations today are helpful in just setting the stage for you of what to expect in August and September. And I also just want to assure you that, as always, even though we're now in this virtual space, we are working to support you and support you in those meetings as you work through these steps. So just know that we are setting up those August and September meetings to ensure that your review can be as fruitful and productive as I know that we all want it to be. So I'll hand it back over to Dr. Torres to begin world languages.
Thank you, Executive Director Coates. Commissioners, I'm back. You're in luck, as we have a dual instructional materials adoption this year. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide you with some detail about the evaluation criteria that was used by publishers to develop and is being used by reviewers to evaluate the world languages instructional materials submitted for adoption by the SBE this year. So today, I'll be joined by Aaron Verticchio, the lead consultant on the World Languages Adoption, to provide an update on the World Language Reviewer Training, which took place April 26th through 30th of 2021, and outline the role the Commission will play once reviewers complete their independent review, engage in panel deliberations, and submit recommendations to report their findings. We will explain the 5 criteria categories for evaluation, focusing on specific criterion in an activity that replicates one aspect of reviewer training, which you are now familiar with, and also provides commissioners with an opportunity to review specific criteria and discuss ways the criteria language will guide the review of materials. So a reviewer work plan was created for the World Languages Adoption Training. And as a reminder, this work plan was created to answer the question, what are the steps to conducting the review of materials? Each task during this first step was training, and the content of the training is identified as it relates to the review or deliberations process. And as a different example, in the second bullet of task 1 notes 3B, social content. This corresponds with a session that day 3 reviewers had at their training that included an activity that provided on reviewing program for social content. That aspect of the training was designed to support the completion of task 3B in the third step of the work plan. The world languages adoption follows the same process and timeline for the arts adoption from the previous presentation. The evaluation criteria is the instrument for the evaluation. The reviewer training occurred last month. The deliberations will take place in July, and the IQC will discuss the report of findings and reviewer recommendations in September to make recommendations to the SBE in November. Just as in the arts, the end product for the world languages evaluation will result in a report of findings that reviewers will generate at deliberations in July. Remember, the reviewers will submit this report of findings and their recommendations to the IQC for discussion at the September meeting. The report of findings will include program information, summary of materials for that program, recommendations of the review panel, and the citations for the criteria for each evaluation criteria. So you'll remember this slide from the arts presentation. It's the flow chart. It's a reminder on the evolution from standards to frameworks and finally to instructional materials. And since this is a dual adoption year, the timelines are the same for world languages as they were for arts. This flow chart provides a timeline of the process, including adoption of the standards, the framework, and the instructional materials. The end result of the review and deliberations is a report of findings that will be delivered to commissioners of the IQC and eventually to the SBE in November 2021. The criteria are organized around 5 categories that are shown on this slide. Each program submission are currently in the process of being reviewed by one of 3 review panels, and each must cover the requirements in these 5 categories. Again, it's this time alignment with the world languages standards, program organization, assessment, access and equity, and instructional planning and support. Just a reminder that only those programs that are determined by the reviewers to meet all criteria in category 1 and that have strengths in each of categories 2 through 5 are recommended for adoption. So at this point, before I pass the presentation along to Aaron, who will take you through the 5 categories of criteria, are there any questions so far? All right, I'm going to pass it on to Aaron. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, so we're going to talk about the world languages evaluation criteria. So category 1 contains 8 individual criteria statements. As with arts, each program must fully meet every criteria statement in this category, including full coverage of all the content standards. Any materials adopted through this process must align to the world language standards, be consistent with the content of the world languages framework for California public schools, kindergarten through grade 12, include approaches and activities aligned to Appendix 2 of the world language standards, and the content of Appendix 2 plays a significant role in educators' understanding of the standards, which is why the World Languages Standards Advisory Committee recommended its inclusion in the World Languages Standards document, and the IQC approved its inclusion. So Appendix 2 describes a series of research-based instructional approaches that respond to a field-wide call to action to create more inclusive learning opportunities and environments intended to have a positive impact on the acquisition of world languages. And finally, they must include opportunities for students to develop communicative and cultural proficiency, content area knowledge, oracy, and literacy in a world language other than English, including activities for developing student proficiency in the communications, cultures, and connections standards of the world language standards. So I'm going to briefly go over some selected criteria in this category.
So California's World Languages of the ACTFL standards into 3 curricular strands: so communication, cultures, and connections. Educators who are familiar with ACTFL standards will recognize this redistribution accomplishes the result is integrating the community's goal into the California communication strand. California's World Languages standards emphasize the communicative importance of the settings where learners need to interact in target language communities at home and around the world. Now that language comparison's goal is a part of the communication strand, the communication standards emphasize how students use receptive and productive structures and language comparisons in service of communication. While the approach to teaching and learning world languages remains aligned with the ACTFL or ACTFL standards, the communities and language comparisons goals have been distributed strategically in California's World Language Standards to emphasize real-world communication and in the world languages classroom. So, as previously stated, instructional materials must align to the World Languages Standards in order to be adopted by the State Board. California's World Languages Standards incorporate the 5 goals, again also known as the 5 C's, into 3 curricular strands that I just described: communication, cultures, and connections. So the question is, how will publishers demonstrate and how will reviewers validate alignment to the World Languages Standards? So the answer is they will use the standards map to show alignment with the World Languages Standards. So similar to how the evaluation criteria maps show alignment to the criterion statements of each category, the standards map shows alignment to the World Languages Standards. The publishers provide citations to show that their programs are responsive to each statement, and then the reviewers are tasked with checking those citations to confirm alignment. So reviewers will confirm standards maps for every proficiency level for which the program is intended for. In some cases, reviewers may add their own citations to these standards maps to bring to deliberations. So please take a moment to read through Category 1, Criterion 1.3. So Appendix 2 of the World Languages Standards includes a non-exhaustive list of ways students may access the World Languages Standards. So this includes students with disabilities, and research-based differentiated world languages and cultures instruction promotes the achievement of all students, including those with special needs, and develops linguistic and cultural knowledge with skills that can be used productively in the world beyond the classroom. So this list includes potential accommodations, differentiation of content, processes, and products, and differentiation based on student interests, learning profiles, and readiness levels. Okay, our next example is Category 1, Criterion 1.6. So I'll give you a second to read through this one too. Okay, so note that the requirement is for materials to go beyond simply learning a language. So rather, students are given opportunities to develop communicative and cultural proficiency, content area knowledge, oracy, and literacy in a world language. Okay, our last example of Category 1 is Criterion 1.7. So for this one, note that the criteria statement requires activities to develop student proficiency within the 3 curricular strands: communication, cultures, and connections. All right, so again, categories 2 through 5 are a little different because for categories 2 through 5, they must show strengths. So I'm going to give a brief summary of each one to prepare for your discussions of the report of findings that you will review in September. So category 2 includes 11 individual criteria statements. So while there's no specific time requirement, programs should provide sufficient instructional content for 180 days of instruction. So adopted programs need to have strengths in the following. So organization in a logical and coherent structure, tables of contents, indexes, glossaries, electronic resources, support materials aligned to standards, content summaries, and assessment guides, as well as chapter overviews that describe how it supports the instruction. in the world languages standards, and that outlines the world languages concepts that are going to be developed, and graphics, which includes pictures, maps, and world languages that are well annotated. So these were just some of the examples of the 11 criteria statements in this category. Right, so category 3 calls for multiple models of diagnostic, formative, and while also providing guidance for teachers on how to interpret assessment results to guide instruction. The program provides teachers with assessment practices at each proficiency range and or at each grade level, or in this case, proficiency level for world languages education. So there are 6 statements in this category that reference a number of purposes and types of assessment. So our breakout session today is going to involve a deeper look into these 6 criteria statements that make up category 3. All right, so category 4 is designed to ensure that programs provide universal and equitable access to high quality curriculum and instruction for all students. The criteria highlight students with diverse needs for differentiated instruction that include all students, including students who are English learners, at promise, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning students, advanced learners, and students with and without visible disabilities. So the category provides further guidance on speaking and listening domains in world language education with respect to the provision of equitable access to students who are deaf or hard of hearing. And those Chapter 13 of the California World Languages Framework provides background and depth for category 4, which has 9 criteria statements. All right, finally, the 11 statements in category 5 require instructional materials to contain a clear path for teachers to follow when planning their 180 days of instruction, and require the materials to offer strong support during implementation. So some examples, some examples of instructional planning and support criteria include strengths in lesson plans and pacing guides, instructional strategies for multiple learning modalities, pedagogical strategies aligned to those listed in Appendix 2 of the World Language Standards, connecting learning content with other areas of curriculum and interdisciplinary instruction, appropriate use of platform-neutral electronic resources, and homework assignments to support learning and provide parent, guardian, and caretaker engagement. So that is the last category for the World Languages evaluation criteria. Are there any questions? Okay, then I'm going to pass things back over to Mike.
Thanks, Erin. The same as the arts publishers, the world languages publishers will complete evaluation criteria maps by creating citations to where each criterion is met in their programs. During their evaluation, reviewers will check the citations, potentially add their own in preparation for discussion during deliberations in order to have those meaningful conversations with their fellow panel members. And again, reviewers will mark yes or no as to whether or not they feel the publisher has fully covered the content that they described for the program that they're reviewing. Now, as you can tell, there are quite a few evaluation criteria similarities between the arts and world languages adoptions. Each evaluation criteria is made up of 5 categories, covering alignment to standards, program organization, assessment, access and equity, and instructional planning and support. Alignment of standards is determined through a standards map. Each evaluation criteria category includes a set number of criteria statements. For both adoptions, you will be receiving a report of findings where the reviewers have made their recommendations of whether or not to move forward with adoption of the programs. Reviewers will cite evidence within each program for each of the evaluation criteria for all 5 categories and through the standards maps. And ultimately, the IQC will discuss those reports of findings and make recommendations to the SBE. And now it's time for a breakout activity. So the rest of this presentation is dedicated to understanding the criteria for educational content by looking closely at, this time, Category 3 assessment. Each group will have a facilitator and CDE support, and in the breakout session, you will be presented with a brainstorming tool for this category on the individual criteria statements of Category 3. So just as before, there will be 3 breakout rooms. The slide shows the 3 groups and their respective facilitators. CDE staff will be present as well to help support the breakout session. And in order to maintain a forum for public to attend the proceeds of this meeting, we will need to ask you again to log out of this main Zoom meeting and join these respective Zoom meetings. As before, the groups are broken out by your last names. Group A is A through F, Group B is G through P, and Group C is Q through Z. So we will have 20 minutes of discussion in your breakout rooms. And let's see, so that puts us...
Dr. Torres, I
Yes.
just wanted to interject one thing and just welcome Commissioner Emeritus Nicole Naditz, who was one of our facilitators for the World Languages Reviewer Training. And I believe she will be in Group B with Alejandro Hernandez. And so I just want to welcome you back and thank you for your service for this instructional materials adoption I just wanted to say that before we broke out. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Coates. So it is about 10:30 right now. So at 10:50, you'll log back into this main Zoom meeting. And are there any questions? All right, see you back at 10:50.
Yes, okay. Go ahead, Dr. Torres.
Thank you, Executive Director Coates. So at this point, you've had a discussion on category.
You're muted, just for the fun of it.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. That's a good joke.
You hear me now? I actually did buy that T-shirt that I was talking about that has a microphone on it and it says you're muted. I should have wore it today. All right, so at this point, you all have had a great discussion on Category 3 and we've reconvened. Does anybody want to share out anything noteworthy from these conversations, challenges, ahas, any questions that were raised about the evaluation criteria for Category 3?
Well, I can say in Group 1, we had a great discussion about what high quality means and how we needed to work with the panel to kind of outline what that should look like so that it would be easier to come to consensus as they were reviewing the different programs.
Thank you, Commissioner Chapman. Does anybody else want to share? Commissioner Fairchild?
This isn't necessarily specific to the assessment, but I just really want to commend the Seaford staff on putting both of these adoptions in a virtual setting together. You guys, they have done a remarkable job and just need so many Scooby Snacks accolades. They made it just a seamless process and very supportive. And I just really want to thank the attention to detail that went into putting this together. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Fairchild. Commissioner Young?
Yes, I definitely want to echo everything that Commissioner Fairchild just shared, because as a newer commissioner and new to this process, I feel very well supported. In our conversation, we were kind of teasing out this notion of strengths. What does it mean to have strengths? We know that Category 1, every criterion statement must be met, but then what does it look like And there's a little bit with reviewers as well of just trusting the process, right? As we enter into deliberations, as they engage in conversations, just being able to make sure that they're really kind of leaning on their expertise and thinking also of the notion of, is there evidence of, being kind of those guiding principles to make sure that the materials that, that they feel as if are worthy of their kind of seal, then come to us for us to also look through and all for the betterment of instructional materials throughout California and in California classrooms. So I think like understanding the whole process is really helpful. And again, the staff has been incredible at really kind of sharing what that process looks like as we walk through and as we do it. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Young. Commissioner Jarvis?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what Commissioner Fairchild said about the process, and I think Commissioner Young also indicated the same, that being still relatively new to the commission and the first time participating in this process, knowing that because of the situation with the virtual world that we're in, CFERT had to really transform what is potentially a familiar process in person into a virtual format. And I found it incredibly remarkable how it was done, how organized, the attention to detail, how precise everything was, how thoughtful the entire week was. And, just props to everyone who was able to do that and participated as a moderator, as a facilitator, as a presenter. It's just beautiful, organized. And I just want to say again that I'm honored and just full of pride to see how the California public education system works and how thoughtful the process is to ensure that our children have access to highly vetted and rigorous and high quality instructional materials. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Commissioner Jarvis. Does anybody else want to comment about Category 3? I do want to take a second to thank you for the accolades, and I want to take a moment to thank the CFERT staff. They're an incredible staff, and huge kudos to Kyle Petty for leading the arts adoption, and huge kudos to Aaron Viticchio, for leading the world languages adoption. Lots of brains went into this, and obviously there's things that we may have missed, but I'm glad that we were able to pull off the training week to seem somewhat seamless. And huge kudos to our leader, Director Shanine Coates. Huge part and integral involvement in pulling the trainings off. So if there aren't any further comment for Category 3, we're going to proceed with the presentation. I know it feels like we should be done. We've got a few more slides to share with you. So just pull up my notes. So let's look one more time at the report of findings and make some connections between the arts adoption and the next steps. Each publisher submission, once reviewed and deliberated, will be the subject of a report of findings that recommends or does not recommend those materials for adoption. So after the presentations, these presentations, at this point, you commissioners have now an understanding of the evaluation criteria for categories 1 through 5. You have an experience in discussing how specific criterion outline how publishers provide and reviewers identify educational content and connections between evaluation criteria, the panel deliberations, and that report of findings. So at this point, it's our hope that you are now more prepared for your next step of discussing the report of findings and making recommendations to the State Board of Education. So this slide contains the same post-deliberations actions for world languages as you saw in the arts presentation, according to the State Board of Education approved schedule of significant events. So at this point, are there any questions? All right, and if there are no questions, that concludes this presentation.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear public comment on the presentation. So are there any members of the public wishing to make a public comment on this item?
There's no public comment at this time.
All right, well, the public comment line for this agenda item is now closed. And that brings us to the last item on the agenda. As you all are well aware, this is the last IQC meeting for Commissioner Howard. Her term ends June 30th, 2021. And I just want to say before I turn it over to Commissioner Howard to see if she has any comments to make, I just want to say that sometimes it's very difficult to find signs of hope these days with so much going on. It's very difficult sometimes to remain optimistic and hopeful. And I think the youth time and time again have proven that they are ready in the face of the national and global calamities that we have bestowed upon them. They are ready to take charge, ready to be heard. And the youth have proven that they refuse to be told that they're too young to understand or too young to have a voice on any matters. And I think Commissioner Howard, in her time here on the commission, has really exemplified this. And I think back to our deliberations over the Ethnic Studies model curriculum, certainly one of the most heated, one of the most difficult and challenging deliberations that we've had recently. And Commissioner Howard really stepped up to the plate to make sure her voice was heard. I recall her asking several critical questions, clarifying questions, critical comments, clarifying comments throughout those deliberations, which significantly contributed to our process during those meetings. And I'm just so proud and hopeful for the future when I see examples like what Commissioner Howard has laid out here. I know there's a lot of school boards and other commissions and other places where they have a seat for students. And a lot of times in my experience, that seat has been sort of a performative gesture to show that, you know, that particular board or commission cares about the youth, but that student isn't really expected to really be a big part of the proceedings. And I think Commissioner Howard has really blazed the trail here on our commission by showing that, no, if you are a young person on one of these boards, like, yes, you will be heard, you are to be heard. And it's not a question about whether the youngsters can keep up with the adults. It's really a question about whether the adults can keep up with the youth, because the youth are ready to take charge. And I think Commissioner Howard has exemplified that. And I think her role here is a exemplar for future student commissioners to follow and to look towards for guidance. So Commissioner Howard, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your participation here, you stepping up to the plate and you being part of these conversations and you making sure that your perspective as a student is heard. So thank you so much. I wish you the best. And I just know that no matter where the rest of your future takes you, like, you are going to continue to be heard and continue to contribute to a much better future, a much better world for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just want to say I'm so incredibly grateful for the opportunity to have been a part of this, and especially to have begun the route of students to be on the IQC. I know Juliana's going to do a great job next year, and I'm super proud of her. And everybody here has been so warm and welcoming, and I felt so free to speak my mind on important issues. And through this process, I've learned so much, not just about the education process and about my own education and how it came to be, but about policymaking and about what teachers do and about what educators do and what my school administration does. And I definitely have a greater appreciation for all that has gone into my education for the past 12 years. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for this. It's been one of the best opportunities I've gotten to have during my time as a student. And so, yeah, thank you all for this.
Board Member Strauss.
So just to follow up on your very articulate comments, Chair Rustin. So Maya, you're our first student that we've ever appointed to the Instructional Quality Commission. And those of you may be aware that it was a student initiative in front of the state board, and then with the legislature that gave the state board the authority to appoint a student instead of an adult for one of the seats. And I can't think of a better time as we struggled and deliberated around ethnic study, Maya's voice. So Maya, first in the interview process, I was fortunate enough to chair the interview screening committee, and you clearly were so articulate. You stood out in your commitment and able to share the serious concerns and perspectives, and you clearly showed that during our work with ethnic studies. And kudos to you for managing it remotely as the rest of us have negotiated it, and we actually accomplished a lot. But you set the stage, Maya, for future students who will follow you, for your participation as an equal member, as a voice that we need to hear in our student voices about the impact of our practice in classrooms. So thank you so much. We actually look really forward to your future. Students who've been with us and served in state policy roles have gone on to make really big impacts in whatever pathway they choose. So we'll be very anxious to see your path forward and how you continue to make a difference. And I think we feel so fortunate that you spent the time with us this year as a student member of IQC. I know Member Rucker would also like to say something as well on behalf of the State Board. So thank you so much for serving and students of California to help us do a better job in instruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member.
Board Member Rucker.
Well, good afternoon. Well, it's still good morning. Good morning, Maya. And, you know, it's always been my pleasure to see students not only get involved with work at this level, but get involved in leadership in various forms and various ways in all of their school communities. And it's easy to speak with superlatives about you and about your work and what you accomplish, but and also to talk about our expectations. So everybody's heaping a lot of expectations on you today, and everybody is telling you they expect big things from you. I know that you are going to be going to Berkeley next year and that you're looking forward to that. What do you plan to study?
I am majoring in rhetoric with a concentration in public discourse and then a minor in American studies.
Absolutely wonderful. The reason why I took time and asked that question is beyond all the expectations that are being thrown on your shoulders and the huge responsibility that you chose to take on by doing this work with the IQC, you had to balance a lot of things this year and to balance the adventure that we called the pandemic and distance learning. And at the same time, you still had to be a young lady, a teenager, and be a friend, a daughter, somebody's sister, niece, granddaughter, and all those things. So while everyone has big expectations of you, my expectations are also large as well. But my expectations include having fun, to look at what your goals in life are and look at your own expectations and know that whatever it is you accomplish, if it made you happy, and if it's something that you are ultimately satisfied with, then you have accomplished way more and exceeded all of the expectations that I would have for you. Remain humble and patient with what is going on in your life and with the people that you have the opportunity to engage with. But more importantly, make sure you remain your authentic self. What I appreciated most in working with you is that not only did you ask good questions, but you were a good listener, you were assertive in your role and your work, and it was easy to feel that you operated in this work as my peer. That takes a very special level of maturity that even adults my age don't often have. And so I would urge you not only to remain humble and exude that humility and kindness and modesty that you've always shown in this process, but continue to do what you just did, which is to support the continuing growth and opportunities that your other peers who will come behind you will have and show. So I know that you're going to be a great student at Berkeley. I graduated from UC Davis, but I know that you will also be a great contributor to your community at whatever level you choose to operate in. So those are my expectations, my hopes, and my aspirations for you. And all I can say is that I wish you well.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. So at this point, I want to also offer some words. And I want to say that we did invite Maya's family, and I know that she has some family members that are here on the Zoom with us. We thought it would be important for them to be here to witness to witness this. And I have to say, Denise and I have learned we are horrible surprise party planners. We are so used to being transparent. So, but on behalf of CDE, we would just like to express our sincere gratitude to you, Maya, as the commission's first student member. So, and this is, some of this has been said, but I do want to point out that Maya has had full voting rights and has just greatly contributed to the work of the IQC. Maya, you willingly applied at a time when the commission was grappling with some really important issues, including the ethnic studies model curriculum. You volunteered to serve as a member of the History Social Science Subject Matter Committee and the Health Subject Matter Committee, just jumping right in and adding your unique, thoughtful perspective to the conversation. And one thing that stands out to me is that during the January IQC orientation, which by the way was one of our first, it was the first virtual orientation, you proved again to be invaluable as you stepped in to help train your team with the technological aspects of the training, just handling the platforms with ease. And what also stands out to me is that you purposefully reached out to pair yourself with the incoming student commissioner, Juliana, during that orientation. And so those types of actions, that kindness and that thoughtfulness that you have is what really stands out to me. And I often think that I would have loved to have had such a confidence and a sense of self that you have at your age. We know your future has no limits, and I just want to thank you for being a stellar first student commissioner. We're going to put a certificate on the screen, and this certificate will be signed by the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and we will send it to you. But it reads, in honor of outstanding service as a valued member of the Instructional Quality Commission from 2020 through 2021, your valuable contributions of time and expertise have been instrumental in furthering our mission to provide all children with quality and innovative educational materials so that they can develop and achieve their full potential. I extend my sincere appreciation for the time and effort you have contributed to such a worthwhile endeavor, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. And then we also took a moment to ask your fellow commissioners to send us a word to describe you. And so we are going to frame this and send this to you. And at this time, I would just like each of the commissioners, I just like to open it up for any words or remarks, or for you to say which word you provided to this and explain why. Commissioner Renteria.
Hi. So I actually chose focused and tenacious. I can't find the other one, but just because I was so impressed from day one, I tried thinking of where I was as a senior in high school, and I was nowhere near just as focused as Maya has been. And she's not just mature. I think it's just her ability to be a part of the group. And when she shared, it's like everybody just automatically was quiet because what she was sharing was so meaningful. And that's just something that it's not everyone has that kind of power and talent. So I hope she continues to stay focused, but continues to also live in the moment. Maya, you're young and you're so full of life and energy and beautiful ideas. And I'm super excited for all that to come to you. But don't let go of that tenacity because we don't have enough tenacious people in this world.
Thank you.
Commissioner Williamson.
Thank you so much. Actually, mine goes very well with Commissioner Renteria's. I chose strong and compassionate. Strong in the sense that it is scary coming on to a board or a commission like this and feeling that you can actually speak and having that voice. And that takes a lot, and that shows that she's a very strong student, and I really love that about her, and that she's compassionate in what she believes. You could see in the way that she was asking her questions and that she was doing her work, and it's important, and seeing that compassion goes so well with all the others that we're talking about it. And so Maya, I wish you the best. Probably not, as close of a mentor, given us that we went into this distant learning and everything kind of went crazy on us, but I just really wish you the best over at Berkeley. And I know you're going to do amazing things, and just stay strong and compassionate when you do.
Thank you. I remember we were paired at the training and you were very helpful in getting me oriented and situated.
Commissioner Costa Hernandez.
Thank you. I mean, a lot of what I think has been said already, and I pick role model and inspiring. And as a role model, I see you, Maya, as a role model for me. This sincerely, like what I want to be when I grow up, because I can think of when I was your age, nowhere near what you are able to do. So I am super excited that you are going to Berkeley. I am not surprised at all. I know that you're going to be super successful. And I, want to offer myself as in any way that I can be of any support. I'll be your cheerleader, but if there's anything else that I can do to support you in the next chapters, you know where to find us.
Member Strauss?
So I actually had several of the same ones that you all did. So I had a thoughtful, committed, and then
Thank you.
I had to put articulate and role model as well. And I just have to say, Maya, you set a great standard for those who will follow you, and great hope for the future. And we're so excited to have gotten the opportunity to work with you, and look forward to your continuing success.
Commissioner Andre?
My word was poised, and I'm just forever impressed and humbled by your composure, Maya. I wanted to thank you for your courage, your integrity, and for stepping up to be the voice for students of California. I have 3 high school students, and I could think of no better person to speak on their behalf. Good luck and many blessings to you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fairchild?
Hi, Maya. I'm so excited for your new adventure. I wish we could have had some time in person to connect. I think that you would be a great friend. I chose dynamic because I would want my daughter to be like you. And I think that is you're an amazing young woman. And I just wish you all the best in the world. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Popovich?
Hi, Maya. Today was the first day I actually got to work with you. So as you're going out, I'm coming in, but I just wanted to say that you are impressive and so composed and so articulate and fearless to be able to join a group of adults. It's scary as an adult joining a group like this with so many intelligent people, but for you to be fearless and to put your voice out there, it's just such an impressive trait, and I know that you're going to do great things. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jarvis?
Yes, thank you. Maya, I just want to tell you and notice, I don't know if you noticed, but you're pulling at all the mommies' heartstrings. All the mommies are tearing up because for those of us who have children, I think you embody what we would hope for our children. And I talk to my 10-year-old daughter about you all the time. After our commission meetings, we talk about, how it went, and I always share about you and your contribution. So I just want to thank you for your courage, your bravery, your hope, and your inspiration for the youth of California. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see one more hand, but I'm not sure if it was from before. Commissioner Andre? No. Okay, got it. Yes. So, I will, again, open it up to anyone else that would like to have words, and then also Just once again, thank you, Maya, and we will send this to you. And I will turn it over to Commissioner Rustin.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I don't ever utter these words, especially in public, but in honor of Maya, I will say, go Bears. And with that, I see Commissioner Young like that. And with that, I believe we are finished for the day. So I will now adjourn the meeting.